Yo, I'm the Investigamer, and it has been a hell of a long week, let me tell you. I have a hangover, so today we're gonna investigate a bit of a broad topic, a less focused topic than usual. Halo, Grand Theft Auto, and Left 4 Dead. Other than having been on this show before, what do these three franchises have in common? They're all AAA franchises. Technically speaking, AAA games are games that generally require large development teams and undergo serious marketing and promotion before release. They are usually backed by substantial publishers and are expected to sell plenty of copies. If you see Activision, EA, Square Enix, or some other major name on the game box, it's likely AAA. These are the games that reach the largest amount of gamers each year. However, there's another class of game that's been on the rise in popularity lately, gaining serious crowd appeal and conquering many of the major gaming outlets such as Steam, Xbox Live, PlayStation Network. I'm of course talking about indie games. As opposed to AAA titles, indie games are developed usually by a very small team of people and are not backed by a large publisher. There are publishers out there that will sign indie developers, but they almost always have no input in the creative process. Indie games certainly aren't a novel concept. In fact, video games began at an independent level and didn't mature into a full-on industry till sometime in the 80s and 90s. After video games started hitting the mainstream consumers, it became difficult for independent developers to promote and sell their game, unless they really stood out. Why am I talking about indie games? Well, as many of you are aware, they've seen a pretty large revival in the past half a decade. Braid, World of Goo, Minecraft, Super Meat Boy, my personal favorite Limbo. These are only a few of the titles that have taken part in what I like to call the rise of the indies. That's good. That's really good. What I want to investigate is why these games are becoming so popular. What makes them different? True, there are still plenty of AAA titles hitting record sales, but there's no denying that indie games have been taking the digital distribution markets by storm. In fact, Minecraft, the most successful indie game I'm aware of, has sold an astounding 33 million copies. Yeah, kinda fucking ridiculous. We could just chalk it all up to the fact that indie games are generally cheaper, so more people will naturally buy them, but I think there's much more going on here. As you may recall, there's only two fundamental differences between independent developers and AAA developers, and that is their size and the amount of publisher influence they have. How can these two aspects affect the resulting game so radically? Well, to find out, I'm going to take a look at a few AAA games and then a few indie games and do a comparison between the two. Let's take a look. Alright, when you think of a AAA game, what comes to mind? A good win. That's better. What do you think people primarily expect to get out of this game? That's right, they want to be Batman. Rocksteady Studios had a definite goal with Arkham Asylum. They were tasked with bringing a polished Batman experience to life, putting the player in Batman's shoes. A lot, and I mean a lot, of AAA games are solely concerned with selling immersion, packaging a fantasy. Don't believe me? Let's take a look at some more AAA games. BioShock Infinite. You play as Booker DeWitt. You engage in an immersive fantasy laid out for you. Nice, neat, packaged experience. Grand Theft Auto 4. Nico, fantasy, packaged. Halo 4. Master Chief, fantasy, packaged. Get the trend? I think you'll find that most AAA games follow this basic principle. There are a few outliers that don't, but in a broad sense, most major industry titles are packaged, immersive fantasies, where the player becomes someone they aren't. Of course, that's not to say that indie games never follow this principle. I mean, some of them do. It just isn't that common. So what pattern do indie games follow? What are they like in comparison? Well, go ahead and think of an indie game. Preferably one that isn't Minecraft. I guess that'll do. What do we know about Fez? It's a 2D platformer that takes place in a 3D world, allowing you to switch between multiple 2D perspectives. The concept was fairly novel when it was announced, but the character in Fez has no defining emotions, personal characteristics, or serious motivations outside finding collectibles. This is a game mainly built around play mechanics. It focuses more on player interaction than it does creating an immersive fantasy experience. So boiled down, what does this really mean? Innovation. Indie games are more innovative. I mean, think about it. The large majority of indie games begin with a single question. Wouldn't it be cool if? This is by no means a definitive constant, far from it. I mean, some indie developers come right out of the gate, trying to be official, play it by the books, trying to be a big name developer, essentially. And that's fine, but the indie games rising to the top of their creed and actually succeeding, those are the ones that are innovative. Super Meat Boy, Limbo, Minecraft. They do something different, they try new things. That's why they're rising to the top. People are drawn towards that. Now you may be thinking, what keeps big studios from innovating? Risk. Remember the first main difference between indies and big names? Publisher influence. Big studios require a tremendous amount of money to operate. They need publisher funding to keep themselves afloat. So they'll do anything it takes to keep the publisher's favor. The publisher says jump, they ask how high. Publishers typically don't like large innovations, simply because it's risky. If a developer spends a year trying to work a major innovation into a game, only for it to fall apart, who takes a hit? The publisher. They just funded a year of unproductive development. This is why publishers would rather see developers work on tried and true formulas. This is one of the major detractors of innovation in the gaming industry at large. But what about the other difference between the two types of developers? Size. Typically, this is what affects the resulting game the most. You see, while plenty of indie games have incorporated a decent level of innovation, not usually seen in mainstream titles, it all stems from a major difference found in most indie games. Self-expression. If 1, 2, or 3 people are working on a game, they are able to invest themselves in it. They load it down with references, artwork, and story design that oftentimes reflects their own personality and struggles in life. Let's take a look at an example. This is Phil Fish. He's the creator of Fez, and for some reason a lot of gamers hate him, mainly because of how he acts towards people on various social media sites. Well, that's all fine and good, but does that affect his game? I'm not sure if anyone can encapsulate douchebag in the form of a game, but there's no shortage of people who find Fez to be somewhat pretentious. The puzzles are often obscure, self-referential, and in some cases just annoying, like the famous QR code puzzle. Yeah, that's real slick, Phil. Pretentious or not, Fez is definitely influenced by the type of person its creator is. The design aspect and nearly all of its creative choices were handled by him alone. When it comes to a game like Halo 4, there may be a room full of people just handling the writing and dialogue, which is then altered by the voice artists, sound designers, and more. Imagine how many warring opinions and debates there are over things like user interface, character designs, feature implementations. Games this big simply do not reflect the personality of its creator. There's no way it possibly can. The best they can hope for is a harmonious experience that puts the player in a fantasy. Trying to give the game a personality is almost always out of the question. It's not impossible, just unlikely. In the end, size and publisher influence affect self-expression and innovation in the video game industry. And gamers are enjoying indie games because of these differences from large-scale traditional titles. Video games are constantly changing, so maybe in the future indie developers and big-name developers will start to become more alike each other. They'll find common ground by learning from each other. But right now, there's a definite wall of separation between the two, and it's probably not going away that soon. You might be left wondering, which is better? Well, neither is better. They're just different. Different strokes for different folks. Me, I like to mingle between the two. And personally, I'd suggest that you do the same. I love Grand Theft Auto 5, and I love The Binding of Isaac, and pretty much every other major indie game that's out right now. I've got the whole fucking list on my Steam account, essentially. And I'm always playing new indie games because I'm part of that culture. But for now, I'm the Investigamer, and I've got to sign out because I am beat. Never trust the crowd, only the investigation.